So the family of Paul Pelosi announced last night that Pelosi had finally left the hospital. How many days after the attack?
Thursday. I actually didn't realize that he had still been in the hospital from, what would that be, early Sunday morning until Thursday.
No, it was Friday morning. It was Thursday night that he went in.
Okay, right. Okay, so nearly a
Right, 'cause
week.
it was, I remember, yes.
In a surgery.
Yeah.
That's obviously a very intensive medical intervention.
That is, he was in the ICU, as we talked about last week, a serious head injury like that, and he left with a fractured skull, can lead to enormous amounts of swelling inside the brain, which then can be fatal.
No, it makes sense, of course, for an octogenarian who had gotten a blow to the head from a hammer to be hospitalized for a long period of time, to require the ICU, to require surgical intervention. So it's not necessarily surprising. But we are still really trying to piece together details of the story, because actually the amount of information that's been public, it's sort of getting parceled out day by day as we kind of try to put the puzzle pieces together. And one of that is, the condition. One of those pieces is the condition of Paul Pelosi. There are a couple of others that we wanted to talk about, and we'll start with first the fact that David DePape, the suspect in this situation, is in the country illegally. I believe he's Canadian. Is it an overstaying?
It's like all these stories turn into like culture war bingo.
Right.
It's like, and he's an illegal immigrant, as the Republicans are now hitting him with.
Right.
And sanctuary state. So everything getting caught up in.
Yep.
Yeah. So yes, he was a Canadian citizen who went to Mexico, entered in 2008 into the United States through Mexico.
Yep. 2008 on a visitor's visa.
On a visa, which often is, I think, a 6-month stay, and
he'd
stayed.
Yeah. So he came in on a B2 visa. And that typically allows, if you're Canadian, that allows you, I think, for like 6 months to stay in the country. And again,
is it a B2?
Yeah, according to Fox News, it's a B2.
That's a temp work visa.
It says it typically allows Canadian visitors to stay for 6 months, and then he then overstayed that B2 visa.
Oh, a B2 or V2?
B2.
B2. Okay, not H. Okay. Anyway, so yes, so he was here illegally.
By the way, our system shouldn't be this alphabet soup of nonsense. Like it's just so convoluted that this is exactly how you get people overstaying different visas, because we've just confused the system to the point where enforcement is virtually impossible. Now, of course, in this case, being in a sanctuary state made enforcement literally impossible.
But it's also the dirty secret of immigration policy, is that a wall does nothing about this.
It does very little.
And visa, it does literally nothing about visa overstays.
About visa overstayers, about crossers. So what the wall does, and Border Patrol says this, and you
right, but he crossed legally.
It funnels you to
stayed illegally.
Right, yeah, exactly. So the purpose of the wall, as people say, is it funnels you to a certain point of the border, which makes capture easier. So you don't have people who are crossing without security having any idea, and not sort of registering and saying this person, this person, this person. All of that is to say.
Right.
The visa process isn't a mess. We talked about this in the damn semi-chips segment last week. That we can't even. It's such a mess. We can't even get people.
Right, people can't hire people that they need to, to build the
semiconductors.
The industry that we say we want to build. That's
a tangent, but
there was also new reporting about the role of the Capitol Police. So it turns out that the Capitol Police did install cameras outside of Pelosi's San Francisco home. Pelosi was in Washington, D.C. It sounds like it was one of those movies where the security guard is like looking away. The way that the Washington Post described it here is that a Capitol Police guard came back, saw lights outside of the home, and then was like, uh-oh, and rewinds the tape, and then sees DePape smashing his way in with a hammer. But they have not put this video out. What I think that the authorities need to start realizing is that every second that they're not putting information out, somebody's filling that vacuum with speculation. And so I think that they have to just change the way that they relate to public disclosures of information. Like they do not have a monopoly over attention anymore. If they don't put a video out, someone else is going to, like, Dinesh D'Souza is going to be like, well, 2:27 a.m. must have been like a sex worker.
So I think I'm curious also in the Washington Post article, it says some security. So what happened is Nancy Pelosi left home, and the Washington Post says some of the security, it may have even said most of the security went with her. I'm still very confused.
Well, she was in D.C.
Right. So, most of it went with her to D.C. So when you're using words like some and most, that could mean a lot of different things. And I'm still genuinely very curious about the situation with the security at the Pelosi home, and not for conspiratorial reasons, but because, hey, not great for the social fabric if we get into a late 60s situation where people are being violently targeted and attacked, and God forbid it gets even worse. So from that perspective, it's very curious to me why the Speaker of the House's husband was at their home and somebody is able to break into a glass door with a hammer. That's very strange to me. And the security, the extent of the security they had was footage, was CCTV across the country at the Capitol Police. Like that, what can they do? I mean, they can dispatch security right away, but there should be security.
If they had called the police right away, maybe it doesn't escalate to like what it got to.
I'd still like to know whether there was security on the campus or on the property and the residence, period. Whether that was private security, whether it was public security. I'm very curious about that. It seems super strange to me. What continues to seem strange to me is how, according to the report that was filed, the police report that was filed, the officers they knocked. They get there, they knocked. And they're told to come in. They open the door, and DePape and Pelosi are struggling over a hammer. And it's when they say, is everything okay? Like, what the heck is going on? DePape says weirdly, like, yeah, we're all good, which sounds like something a like criminal drug person who's like tripping on something might say. Right. But then he's able, with the police right there, to take the hammer from Pelosi and whack him in the head without police intervention. I mean, it's plausible that this all happens really quickly, but to your point, like, I actually still think there are some dots that need to be connected, and I feel like there has been an unwillingness to be forthcoming with information, while at the same time, Joe Biden is perfectly willing to use it in his speech, but we still don't actually really know how some of this happened. It's very strange.
I do think they should put the body cam footage out as soon as possible, but he himself, David DePape, has been very clear that, and he is he
said what his motive was.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's an example of this increasing phenomenon of the hippie to QAnon pipeline.
Yes.
So a lot of people who haven't been paying attention to the transformation of our politics would be surprised. And next segment we'll play Jesse Waters talking about how he was an Obama voting person.
A nudist, Ibogaine,
And if you haven't been paying attention, then to you, it's totally surprising that a person who is like pro-nudist and like an Obama supporter would now be a right-wing QAnon person.
By the way,
but that pipeline is greasy as hell. People are sliding through there super fast.
100%. And it's been like that for a few years. And if you haven't been paying attention to it, pay attention to it, because it's especially been accelerated by vaccine mandates and by COVID, the hippie to QAnon pipeline, or even the hippie to QAnon sort of horseshoe theory.
Right, because the hippies already had the skepticism of authority. And the transgressive counterculture attitude. There's not a place for that as much on the left, except in proscribed ways. So you kind of have to go over to the right now to get your freak on.
So I was gonna say, so people don't think that Ryan is like speaking in anything but reverence for hippies. I feel like you are speaking as a...
Right.
Yeah. 100%. Right. You have not gone full Q.
No,
you haven't gone even a tiny bit Q, but you understand where the sort of appeal is to the hippie that sort of says, and by the way, like old school leftist, and we've seen this happen with some old school leftists who seem, to go off the rails because they're looking around and they cannot find a single institution that is worthy of their trust. And that puts people in dangerous directions.
Right. And there was and I believe this guy was part of it, the whole 9/11 conspiracy, which I think, to the kind of American left's credit, just tamped that down. We're like, no, stop it. Like, stop it with the steel plates melting in the towers and like all of this nonsense.
I don't think the left really shut that down very effectively. But you're saying the mainstream left.
anything resembling like a remotely respectable left. Like you had one member of Congress who floated it, and they primaried her and ended her career. Cynthia McKinney down in Georgia. Whereas Republicans, you can say whatever you want nowadays, and it's probably going to help you in a primary, right?
Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene, also from Georgia, was forced to walk back Q, was forced to walk back 9/11 trutherism, and that's actually kind of an interesting parallel with Cynthia McKinney. And someone should write it if they haven't. That the parties like pushed both of them to disavow the like fringe conspiracy theory, and at the same time that. I think corporate media has really struggled to understand DePape.
They're like, here, we've got better conspiracy theories for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wait till you hear about the P-tape. But I think David DePape, I think a reason a lot of the corporate media struggled to sort of square the circle of the hippie, nudist, and not even just corporate media, conservative media, failed to square that circle is because despite the fact that they have highly paid disinformation reporters on their freaking payrolls, they don't actually know a damn thing about Q. They truly don't know what the makeup of the fringe right and left are because they operate on crude stereotypes, even when it's their job to troll Reddit. They can never challenge their priors enough to let go and see. Actually, some of these people are legitimately from the old school left. They're legitimately coming at this from the perspective of people who have been hurt by our system, who have been through pain at the hands of our system, and who don't trust a thing anymore.
Right. The media hears Q, and they expect they're going to get a bearded guy with a stained T-shirt, like an AK-47, and a gigantic flag on his pickup truck.
Yep.
And then they're surprised if it's a hippie-looking dude. And if you've been paying attention, you're like, no, it's those hippies who are making up the backbone in some ways of the far right. Look at the shaman being like one example. Also, often like. Blended with acute and also like prolonged mental health crises. Mm-hmm. Like that's a significant portion of what's going on here as well. But the shaman, you're like, well, what on earth is this?
I think the thing with DePape is there was similarly, I think it was also like a release valve as we started to get more information, and reasonably so, right? Like we could say there was a lot of sort of celebration, I think, on the left and saying like, listen, we know the details, and now we're gonna stuff the conspiracy theorists' face in the dirt and just smear it around and say like, you idiots, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact of the matter is people have lost trust, and they have lost trust for good reason. A lack of institutional faith is reasonable. You are unreasonable if you have faith in the Department of Homeland Security and in our intelligence community and in our FBI. That's the unreasonable position. And that's not to say conspiracy theories should be legitimized whatsoever, but the people in the legacy media whose instinct is just to shove people's face in it and rub it around instead of saying, actually, we kind of understand why people were like, wait, dude busted into the Speaker of the House's home with a hammer and beat her husband in front of the police. It sounds weird. It's a weird story. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, though.
But I do think that the folks who like dabble with and engage in these conspiracy theories aren't at all directly responsible for the individual agency of a particular person, but you're creating an atmosphere that is likely going to produce more violence and more.
I think so. And
more lashing out, and so in that sense, there is some responsibility, and so this. We can head in different directions. We're a society that does have agency. We're not just kind of directed in a particular way by immovable forces. Like we can decide to kind of pull back from the brink on some of this stuff. So doesn't mean they necessarily need to rub people's face in it, but I do think there's got to be some way to say, look, this is serious stuff. Like if she were home, he probably doesn't get in. So the chance that he could actually have killed her.
But we don't know.
And he didn't want to kill her. He said he wanted to break her knees.
He wanted to hold her.
Shows like another level of mental illness.
The thing is, like, we don't know what would have happened had she been there, because we know there would have been more security, but we actually don't really know what the security lapse was yet, and I think we will, and I can be patient for all those details. We don't need to get them all in the first week. But I would like Capitol Police. That was a security lapse on January 6th. If we want to be making comparisons, and we need our law enforcement, obviously, for the sake of social fabric and the fact that we're all paying our money into the systems to protect the people that we elect. I would love to know what the security situation was there. To your point, I agree, although I would say it doesn't mean that we can't demand answers from people in positions of power. And I think the reflex to treat people like that as conspiracy theorists is unhealthy. But I also think, I agree with you. The fact that we can't be reasonable about some of this stuff it's dangerous. It's outright dangerous.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.